We are without a doubt the most documented human beings in the history of our species. Think about it for a second. You have gigabytes of text, tens of thousands of photos. You've got group chats, location sharing apps, rings on your watch tracking your heartbeat. All this data proving objectively that you are connected to other people. You caption your loneliness with a nice little filter. You broadcast your grief to a timeline, and despite swimming in this absolute ocean of visibility, you are still incredibly starved for actual love. That is the defining paradox of our generation. We are starving at a banquet of connection. We have engineered these platforms that give us endless data on each other. What you ate for breakfast, where you went on vacation, who you voted for. We know everything about everyone, but the core, that animating element of human existence, is completely missing. We confused observation with intimacy. And what should really bother you, what should keep you up at night, is that we use the word love every single day. You say it to your partner as you walk out the door. You type it to your friends with little heart emojis. You buy it printed on mass-produced greeting cards at the pharmacy. Multi-billion-dollar industries built around one four-letter word. Weddings, diamonds, romantic comedies, dating apps. And yet, if I stopped you right now and asked you to actually define it, you probably couldn't. Most people freeze. Nobody has a real answer. And honestly, that is not an accident. That is a systemic, structural problem. And it is the exact problem that Bell Hooks, this brilliant cultural critic and visionary, sat down to dismantle back in 1999 when she published All About Love, New Visions. Now, the mission today is not to give you cozy affirmation. This book has been sitting on shelves for decades, acting as a quiet, devastating indictment of every comfortable lie we tell ourselves. She is not interested in 10 tips to spice up your marriage, no quick fixes. She wants to show you how the very architecture of our society, our economy, our gender roles, our family structures, how all of it is actually designed to keep you loveless. And that is a terrifying thought. The idea that the world is loveless, not by accident, not because we are just bad at it, but by design. Think about it this way. The modern use of the word love operates exactly like a currency that has experienced catastrophic hyperinflation. Think about what happens when a government prints money recklessly. The bills are still in circulation, people are still handing them back and forth, but they have lost all their purchasing power. You need a wheelbarrow of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. That is what we have done with the word love. We throw it around so casually. I love this new coffee shop. I love your shoes. I love you, but I am going to constantly belittle you in front of our friends. We print so much of this word that it means nothing anymore. It has zero emotional purchasing power left. And to fix a broken, hyperinflated currency, you have to stop the presses. You have to establish a gold standard. You have to back the paper with something real, something tangible that actually has intrinsic weight. For Hooks, establishing that gold standard means starting at the absolute foundation, taking this word we have stripped of all meaning and finally agreeing on what it actually is. So, if you stop most people mid-sentence and ask them to define love, you can almost see the panic set in. They freeze, they fumble, and almost universally, they resort to describing sensations. They say things like, "It is this overwhelming feeling, you just know it when you feel it in your gut. It is when you care about someone so deeply it hurts." And Hooks completely dismantles that approach. She says describing a sensation is not the same thing as providing a definition. And more importantly, sensations lie. Feelings are deeply unreliable narrators, because if love is just a feeling, it disappears the moment the feeling does. We have all witnessed the damage this belief causes. We have all seen someone stay in a destructive, abusive relationship because their partner swears they feel so much love. The feeling gets used as a shield to deflect from the reality of the behavior. It creates a massive loophole for accountability, because if love is merely a feeling, a spontaneous emotional weather event you just fall into, then you have no control over it. You are a passive victim of romance. And if you are passive, you are not responsible. You can say, "I couldn't help it, I just fell out of love," or "I love her, I just can't stop hurting her." Hooks rejects this entirely. So what does she replace it with? She goes looking for a concrete, actionable definition, and she anchors her entire philosophy in the work of psychiatrist Scott Peck, who was deeply influenced by Erich Fromm. And Peck's definition of love, which Hooks adopts, is this: the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Let's break that down word by word, because there is so much packed into that single sentence. The will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Start with the word will. Will implies a conscious, deliberate choice. It implies intention. It means waking up on a random Tuesday when the sky is grey, you have a headache, the rent is due, and you are completely devoid of any romantic butterflies, and choosing to act in a loving way anyway. Love is the heavy lifting. It is not something that happens to you. It is something you decide to do. By defining love as a verb, as an act of will, you completely shift the paradigm of human relationships. If love is a choice, it automatically demands accountability. You cannot accidentally love someone, and you cannot accidentally fail to love someone. You are fully accountable for the quality of the care you put into the world. You have to evaluate your actions, not your internal weather. Are you actively extending yourself? Are you pushing past your own comfort zone to nurture someone else's growth? If the answer is no, then regardless of how intensely your heart flutters when they walk in the room, you are not loving them. And this distinction, this shift from noun to verb, changes everything about how we look at our pasts. Because Hooks takes this definition and applies it with terrifying rigor. She asks you to look back at the relationships in your life, the ones that left deep scars, the ones where someone looked you in the eye, that I love you, and then proceeded to diminish your confidence, ignore your boundaries, or subject you to chaos. She asks, by this strict definition of nurturing spiritual growth, was that actually love? And her answer is an uncompromising no. It is an absolute non-negotiable in her framework. Love and abuse cannot coexist. They are mutually exclusive. She points out that abuse and neglect are by their very nature the direct opposites of nurture and care. You cannot simultaneously nurture a plant and pour bleach into its soil. This is a radical, desperately needed pushback against some of our most deeply ingrained cultural narratives. Think about the crimes of passion trope. It is everywhere. In literature, in movies, in true crime. The narrative that a man was so overwhelmed by his love for a woman that he hurt her. We romanticize possession and jealousy to a sickening degree. We frame extreme violence as the dark side of extreme love. Hooks explicitly condemns this. The existence of abuse, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, is not a messy byproduct of love. It is the definitive proof of the absence of love. You cannot claim to love someone while you are actively tearing down their spirit, subjecting them to violence, or stripping them of their autonomy. The two states cannot occupy the same space. Now, you might be wondering, if love is not a feeling, if it is this rigorous discipline of spiritual growth, what do we do with the butterflies, the romance? Does Hooks expect us to approach dating like a tax audit, completely devoid of thrill and magic? No, she does not dismiss the emotional rush of a new relationship. There is a concept she references from psychologist John Wellwood that perfectly explains this dynamic. Wellwood makes a crucial distinction between a heart connection and a soul connection. That initial dizzying rush, that mysterious electric click you feel when you meet someone and your nervous system just lights up, that is a real, valid heart connection. But you have to understand what it is. It is the invitation to love. It is not love itself. The click is the universe handing you an envelope. Here is someone you have a natural resonance with. But receiving an invitation is not the same thing as showing up, helping cook the meal, and staying late to wash the dishes. Love is the labor that comes after the invitation is accepted. The feeling is the catalyst. The action is the love. So, if love is this highly complex skill of extending yourself and nurturing growth without resorting to abuse or domination, where were we supposed to learn how to do that? Nobody teaches a class on this. To understand why we are all so underprepared for love, we have to go back to the very first classroom. We have to look at childhood. Hooks identifies the family unit as the original school of love, a laboratory where every single one of us receives our foundational education on what love looks like, how it behaves, what it costs, and what we have to do to earn it. The family is where the blueprint is drawn, but she identifies a massive, tragic contradiction at the very center of that schooling, a contradiction that most of us are still trying to untangle decades later. Millions of parents genuinely, deeply believe that they can be verbally abusive, emotionally neglectful, or physically dominant and still be profoundly loving parents. They hold those two realities in their heads at the exact same time. I yell at you because I love you. I hit you for your own good. And because children are essentially captive audiences, they rely on their parents for literal survival. They have no choice but to accept this distorted logic. logic. A child's brain is a meaning-making machine. If the person providing their food and shelter is also the person terrifying them, a child's brain has to reconcile that to survive. So they merge the concepts. They learn early on that love and abuse are not opposites. They are siblings. They can exist side by side in the same house, inside the same person. And this is exactly why it is so hard for adults to leave toxic relationships later in life. They carry this cracked blueprint into their future. If you learned at age 6 that the person who loves you the most is also the person who makes you feel worthless, and at age 26, when your partner humiliates you, the brain does not signal danger, it signals something far more dangerous. This is familiar. This must be love. To counter this generational damage, Hooks introduces a concept that completely stopped me in my tracks. She writes, "Without justice, there can be no love." We usually reserve the word justice for courtrooms, for legal systems, for grand political movements. We do not think about it in the context of rocking chairs and kitchen tables. But Hooks plants it right there, in the living room, in the everyday interactions between parents and children. What does justice in the living room actually look like? It looks like recognizing the fundamental human rights of the child. Hooks argues that when we love children, we must acknowledge through every single one of our actions that they are not our property. They are not extensions of our ego. They are independent human beings with rights, and loving them means respecting, upholding, and fiercely protecting those rights. Justice means there is fairness, accountability, and an absence of arbitrary domination, even and especially when there is a massive power imbalance. There is a story in the research that illustrates this perfectly. It is about a mother, her young daughter, and an argument over an allowance. The grandmother, who grew up with very little money and never received an allowance herself, was resisting giving her daughter a small allowance. Her reasoning was rooted in fear and control. She assumed the child would immediately blow the money on candy. She did not want to waste her hard-earned cash. It is a very common parental reflex. I know best. You do not know the value of $1. The answer is no. An exercise of unilateral power. But instead of shutting the child down with authoritarian dominance, she was challenged to try a different approach. She opened a dialogue. She sat down with her daughter, expressed her own anxieties about money, but ultimately gave her a small allowance with a statement of hope and trust. She surrendered her absolute control over the outcome, and the result was transformative. The child did not buy candy. She saved her money to buy things she had thoughtfully decided were important. The mother's assumption was completely wrong. The candy is not even the point of the story. The point is the modeling. Think about what that mother showed her child by being willing to listen, by reflecting on her own internal biases, by changing her mind, and by opening a dialogue instead of laying down the law. She modeled conflict resolution without domination. She showed her daughter that adults are not infallible, that parents can be wrong, that you can disagree with someone without stripping them of their dignity or overpowering them. That is the exact definition of nurturing spiritual growth. Now, if you are a parent listening to this, your chest might be getting a little tight right now, because this standard sounds terrifying. Parenting is exhausting. You are running on no sleep. The house is a mess. You are stressed about bills, and the toddler just threw a bowl of spaghetti at the wall. If you snap, lose your temper, or raise your voice in a moment of pure exhaustion, have you fundamentally failed at love? Hooks is not a utopian dreamer who ignores human frailty. She is not demanding robotic perfection. What she is demanding is a culture of repair. Here is what that means. It is the difference between an isolated misstep and an ongoing pattern of domination. If you lose your temper and yell at your child, what happens next? That is the critical moment. In an authoritarian, loveless dynamic, the parent uses their size and their power to crush the child into submission. They demand the child accept the yelling as just the way it is, or worse, they blame the child for the outburst. Look what you made me do. But in a culture of repair, the parent takes a breath, kneels down to the child's eye level and says, "I was very frustrated, but I was wrong to yell at you. I am sorry. You did not deserve to be spoken to that way." Apology is the justice. It tells the child, my behavior was the problem, not your existence. Love allows for mistakes, but it absolutely demands accountability for those mistakes. It demands that the strong do not use their strength to exploit the weak. Now, That dynamic we learn in the living room, the idea that the strong get to dominate the weak and the weak just have to absorb it and call it care, that does not stay in childhood. We pack that distorted blueprint into our suitcases and drag it directly into our adult relationships. And specifically, we drag it into the ways men and women are programmed by society to interact. This is one of the most vital pillars of Hook's philosophy. She is very explicit that patriarchy is not just a political buzzword, it is a rigid, suffocating system that damages absolutely everyone who participates in it, regardless of gender. And it damages them specifically because male domination stands directly in the way of love. If love requires the mutual nurturing of spiritual growth, you fundamentally cannot have mutuality in a system where one group of people is structurally positioned as superior to another. Hooks writes about the breaking of men. This idea has stayed with me since I first read it. We often talk about how patriarchy oppresses women, but Hooks explores something that gets far less attention: how it actively mutilates the emotional lives of men. She points out that patriarchal masculinity requires boys from a very young age to see themselves as more powerful than women and to do whatever it takes to maintain that position. Think about the conditioning. How does a culture break a boy? It starts early. Society teaches young boys that being emotionally honest, being vulnerable, or crying is soft. They are taught that their value lies in stoicism, in strength, in the ability to endure pain without complaint. Boys do not cry. The locker room dynamics, the media they consume, the offhand comments from fathers or coaches, it all reinforces the idea that emotional resonance is weakness. It is the reason a middle school boy will actively look away and crack a joke when his best friend is crying. He is being trained to disconnect. He is being taught that the ability to detach, to be indifferent, to lie about his feelings without facing consequences, that is what separates the men from the boys. That is a devastating education. It cuts men off from their own internal compass. They are taught to navigate the world through power, leverage, and control, rather than through connection and empathy. Hooks references the work of John Stoltenberg here, points out that to be considered a real man in this patriarchal framework means you are essentially given a license to break the rules of human decency. You are permitted, even expected, to withhold emotion, to dominate conversations, to take up space, and if necessary, to be violent to protect your honor or your property. By enforcing this strict code, society systematically destroys a man's capacity to practice love as an act of mutual spiritual growth. He cannot extend himself to another because he has been taught that extending himself is a surrender of power. Now, what does this same system do to women? From childhood, women are taught to long for love. It is presented as the ultimate goal. They are told that securing love, specifically male romantic love, is the ultimate validation of their worth. But because they are operating inside this patriarchal structure, they are often approaching love from what Hooks calls a position of lack. And a position of lack is a dangerous place to operate from. It means you are approaching a relationship not from a place of wholeness, looking for a partner to build with, but from a place of starvation, looking for someone to fill an agonizing void, because society told you that you are empty without it. And because women have been taught that a relationship is the ultimate prize, they will often tolerate immense suffering to keep it. They will settle for relationships where they are consistently lied to, patronized, or overtly dominated, simply to maintain the bond. They negotiate away their own spiritual growth just to avoid being alone. And this ties back to everything we just discussed about childhood. If a woman learned as a little girl that the person who loves her most can also dominate her, control her, or yell at her, she is primed to accept that exact same dynamic from a partner later in life. The cage feels like home. Now, Hooks takes a very sharp scalpel to a massive cultural phenomenon that shaped an entire generation's understanding of relationships, the Mars and Venus myth. Books like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus dominated the cultural conversation for a decade. They sold millions of copies because they offered a simple, comforting excuse for why heterosexual relationships were so incredibly difficult. The essential premise was this: men and women are just fundamentally different. We are practically alien species. Men are rational, women are emotional. We have completely different biological imperatives. So stop trying to change each other. Just accept the miscommunication, learn to adapt. It was presented as liberating wisdom, but Hooks argues that this is not wisdom at all. It is a fundamental lie designed to protect the patriarchy. She forcefully asserts that these differences are not innate genetic traits, they are not biological destiny, they are learned characteristics, they are the direct result of the intense lifelong socialization we just described. Because if men and women truly inhabited totally different emotional universes by nature, true mutuality, and therefore true love, would be biologically impossible. You cannot build mutual spiritual growth with someone who does not share your fundamental capacity for empathy. Men are fully biologically capable of deep emotional presence. Women are fully biologically capable of fierce rational independence. The capacity is equal. It is the system that punishes them for displaying those traits. It mocks the vulnerable man and labels the independent woman as difficult or unlovable. The Mars and Venus narrative gives everyone a pseudoscientific excuse to stop trying. So if patriarchy is so deeply toxic to love, if it breaks men by forcing them into emotional isolation and keeps women in this desperate position of lack, why is it so durable? Why do so many people, both men and women, actively and fiercely defend these traditional gender roles? Why do we seek out these power dynamics if they make us so miserable? Because power and structure are highly seductive substitutes for the terrifying vulnerability of love. Genuine love is horrifying. To truly love someone, to extend yourself, to remove your armor, to allow yourself to be fully seen, knowing that the other person has the power to shatter you, and to engage in the messy, unpredictable work of mutual spiritual growth, that requires immense courage. It involves the constant risk of rejection and failure. Power, on the other hand, feels safe. It is clean. It is predictable. Think of it like a theater production. Patriarchy hands everyone a script the moment they are born. You are the provider. You be stoic. You are the nurturer. You be accommodating. Memorizing the script is exhausting. Wearing the heavy costumes is suffocating, but at least you know exactly where to stand on the stage. You know your lines. It is infinitely easier to control someone, or to be comfortably controlled by a familiar system, than to face the absolute wilderness of genuine intimacy. Patriarchy offers you a script, so you never have to face the terror of the unknown. True love requires you to burn the script. And this desire for control, this reliance on a transactional script to keep us safe, it is not just a gender issue, it is heavily reinforced every single day by the economic system we live under. Our economy actually profits from our lovelessness. This is where Hooks expands her argument from a relationship critique to a radical social one. She argues that contemporary capitalism does not just affect our wallets, it infects our souls. It deifies separateness, it worships individual gain. It thrives on a culture of alienation and lovelessness. And she points out a dynamic that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. We have imported market logic directly into our most intimate relationships. We treat human connection as a transactional marketplace. We keep meticulous score. We invest time, affection, and money, and we expect a measurable, immediate return on that investment. And if the relationship hits a rough patch, if the profit margins of our happiness dip, we discard people. Hooks uses a very specific term here. We treat partners like Dixie cups, disposable items designed to hold water for a brief moment and then be crushed and thrown away the second they stop satisfying our needs. Think about how this plays out in modern dating culture. It is literally a catalog. You are swiping through human beings based on a curated list of features, height, job, photos, the exact same way you filter for a product online. It conditions your brain to believe there is always an endless supply of options. So why commit to repairing a connection when a better match might be one swipe away? We consume relationships rather than building them. And Hooks extends this critique beyond dating. She takes aim at the modern wellness and self-help industry. She highlights what she calls a dangerous narcissism embedded in much of today's self-help rhetoric. Focus only on yourself. Protect your peace at all costs. You do not need anyone else to be complete. Cut out anyone who lowers your vibration. Society pushes this narrative of extreme self-improvement while completely ignoring the necessity of practicing love within a community. It turns healing into a commodified solo sport. It isolates us further under the guise of empowerment, making us better consumers but terrible community members. Hooks uses a striking analogy comparing greed and connection. She talks about the psychology of gambling and lotteries, the lust for immediate material wealth, this get-rich-quick mentality that drives people to blow their paychecks on scratch cards or commit crimes, perfectly mirrors our modern demand for immediate emotional gratification in relationships. We want the jackpot without doing the labor. We want the fairy tale ending, the profound soulmate connection, without enduring the difficult, unglamorous daily work of spiritual growth. We want to scratch the ticket and win love. And both of those impulses, the material greed driven by capitalism and the emotional greed driven by consumer intimacy, destroy the slow, steady building of trust. Now, some people push back here. Is it really fair to blame capitalism because someone ghosted you on a dating app, because a couple gets divorced after 10 years? Are we not just removing personal responsibility by blaming the market? It is a fair question, but it misunderstands Hook's point entirely. She is not blaming an economic system for a single bad date or a single act of selfishness. She is asking you to recognize the water you are swimming in. When a culture spends billions of dollars every single day through the entire apparatus of advertising and media to glamorize wealth, ruthless competition, and the curation of a perfect image, it is teaching you foundational, subconscious lessons about human value. It teaches you that value is tied to performance and consumption. If you are raised in a system that constantly tells you that you are a consumer shopping for the best product to satisfy your desires, you will carry that wiring into your romantic life. You will look for the highest status, the best features, the greatest return on your emotional investment. You will evaluate people based on what they can do for you. You will not approach them as an equal, flawed human being with whom to share a difficult journey of spiritual growth. You will perform your worth rather than connect your soul. So if market logic demands that we constantly perform and curate an image, then the most radical thing we can do is to stop performing entirely. And that brings us to something Hooks considers absolutely foundational to love: honesty. Not the surface level kind, not just not cheating, foundational, terrifying honesty. She makes an uncompromising claim: you cannot love someone you are lying to. And you cannot love someone who is lying to you. And she is not only targeting massive betrayals, she is not just talking about affairs or hidden debts or secret double lives. She is targeting the quiet, everyday, socially acceptable lying that most of us engage in without even registering it as lying. The curation of the self, the thousands of tiny deceptions we perform daily, swallowing your feelings and saying "I am fine" to avoid a necessary argument, editing your personality on a first date so you appear more relaxed or low maintenance than you actually are, presenting a watered-down version of your beliefs to your family because the real version would cause friction at the dinner table. Almost everyone does this. We are actively taught to do it from childhood. We call it being polite. We call it keeping the peace. We view it as a social necessity. But Hooks explains the devastating cost of that habit. Go back to the definition of love. Nurturing a person's actual spiritual growth. To nurture a person, you have to actually see their real self. You cannot nurture a facade. If you are projecting a carefully curated image of the perfect, agreeable partner and your significant other falls deeply in love with that image, they are not loving you. They are loving a character, a phantom you created, and by maintaining that phantom, you are denying them the opportunity to practice real love on the real you. You are starving yourself of the very connection you are craving. Now, a common fear here is this: if I am completely unfiltered with my partner, if I voice every single annoyance, every raw, uncharitable thought that crosses my mind, do I not just become cruel in the name of radical honesty? Hooks is absolutely not advocating for cruelty disguised as honesty. People often use "I am just being brutally honest" as a weapon to hurt others. That is not what she means. There is a significant difference between polite tact and foundational deception. Not mentioning that you dislike your partner's favorite shirt is tact. Hiding who you fundamentally are, what you value, and what you need emotionally, that is deception. And that deception, however comfortable, makes real love impossible. Love requires the courage to unmask the core architecture of who you are, to share your inner struggles, your deep fears, your genuine needs, And when you take that terrifying risk of revealing your true self to a partner, and you find that this revelation brings acceptance rather than judgment, you discover something remarkable. You discover that an intimate relationship can be a sanctuary from the world of facades, a space where you can finally put down the heavy armor of performance and just breathe. But if radical honesty is so difficult in romantic relationships, where do we actually get to practice it? Where is the training ground? Where do we learn to unmask without the terror of losing everything? To answer that, we have to look at the relationships our culture consistently pushes to the sidelines. We need to talk about friendship. Books ask us to examine the unwritten hierarchy of love that governs our culture. We operate under a universally accepted, deeply flawed pyramid. Romantic love sits at the absolute pinnacle. It is the ultimate goal, the thing that validates your adulthood and proves your worth. Below that, family love, obligatory and structural. And then, way down at the bottom, treated as secondary and almost juvenile, is friendship. Friendship is the consolation prize. Think about the messaging. Oh, you are 35 and single. Well, at least you have really good friends. It is treated like a backup parachute for people whose main engine failed. A placeholder until the real love comes along. But Hooks argues that this pyramid is completely inverted. She asserts that for most of us, friendship is actually where we have our first and often our most authentic experience of love. Love that is not entangled with possession, control, or societal obligation. Family love comes with blood ties, decades of history, and unavoidable power dynamics. Romantic love comes with intense cultural scripts, sexual expectations, financial pressure, and the weight of building a life together. But friendship, genuine friendship, is freely chosen, and it is repeatedly, voluntarily renewed. There is no legal contract tying you to your best friend, no mortgage holding you together. You choose them every single time you pick up the phone. And because the pressure to perform the perfect partnership is absent, friendships are often where we practice the most radical honesty. We show up messy, we complain, we argue, we repair the rupture, and we stay. If your friend is in a bad mood, you do not immediately think, this relationship is doomed. You practice actual, patient, unconditional care. And this is exactly why Hooks identifies the nuclear family model as a psychological trap. If your friend is in a bad mood, you do not immediately think, this relationship is doomed. You practice actual, patient, unconditional care. And this is exactly why Hooks identifies the nuclear family model as a psychological trap. No one person can be your best friend, your romantic partner, your financial co-pilot, your co-parent, your therapist, and your spiritual guide. Nobody can hold all of that. We demand that our romantic partner fulfill every single one of those roles. We guarantee failure. We set love up to collapse under the weight of impossible expectations. There is a line from Hooks in this section that fundamentally rewired my brain. She writes, "There is no special love exclusively reserved for romantic partners." Let that land for a second. You are listening to this right now, and you are single, and society is telling you that you are somehow incomplete or failing at the human experience, but you have deep, loving, honest, fiercely loyal friendships. You are not failing at love. You are actively, wildly succeeding at it. You are practicing the exact same virtues of care, respect, knowledge, and responsibility that define the highest forms of human connection. Love is about deep, honest presence and mutual spiritual growth, regardless of the label society puts on the relationship. And this realization that love is a communal energy, a deliberate presence, brings us to a dimension of Hooks' work that tends to make a lot of modern readers nervous. She insists it is the engine that drives the whole vehicle. We have to talk about the spiritual undercurrent. Now, the word spiritual makes people uncomfortable. In our hyper-rational, secular modern world, it either sounds like vague crystal healing, or it sounds like organized religion, which carries immense trauma and baggage for a lot of people. Hooks is a rigorous intellectual, and she uses the term very precisely. She is not mandating that you join a specific church or adhere to a theology. A spiritual awakening in her framework is simply the connective tissue of human empathy. It is the fundamental belief that something exists beyond your own ego, the recognition of the animating life force in all human beings. And to access the spiritual dimension of love, we have to do something incredibly painful. We have to overcome our own narcissism, the deeply ingrained belief that the universe is organized around your personal needs. If you approach every interaction, every date, every friendship purely through the filter of what do I get out of this, or how does this make me feel, then what you are calling love is actually just dependency or attachment. You are treating people like vending machines for your own validation. Love requires escaping that self-centered gravity. It requires recognizing the profound, independent, sacred reality of another person. And the biggest modern barrier to that recognition is not necessarily malice, it is distraction. Hooks wrote this in 1999, before smartphones had entirely colonized our brains, which makes her insight remarkably prescient. We live in a culture of chronic, weaponized distraction. Screens, notifications, endless scrolling, the glorification of busyness. Stillness feels like failure. But Hooks argues quite simply that you cannot love someone you are not present with. Attention is the most basic, fundamental act of love. In an economy that harvests and monetizes our attention, giving your undivided focus to another human being is an act of spiritual rebellion. When you put your phone face down, look someone in the eye, and truly listen to them without already formulating your response, you are extending yourself. You are choosing to nurture their spiritual growth in that exact moment. But you cannot extend that attention if the cup is completely empty. And Hooks is incredibly clear on this point. The love you are desperately searching for out in the world is the exact love you have not yet learned to give yourself. Self-love is the absolute prerequisite for spiritual connection. It is the foundation. But we have to be careful here. We have to distinguish the deep spiritual practice of self-love from the superficial, narcissistic treat-yourself culture we talked about earlier. Because on the surface, they seem to contradict each other. If spiritual love means focusing on the other person and overcoming your own ego, but self-love means focusing on yourself and your own needs, are those not in direct conflict? How do you abandon your ego while simultaneously prioritizing yourself? Resolving that tension is the key to Hooks' entire philosophy. Self-love is not about inflating the ego or believing you are flawless. True self-love is giving yourself the unconditional acceptance, the grace, and the rigorous care you need so that you can approach the rest of the world from a place of fulfillment rather than a place of lack. Think of it this way. There is a difference between drinking a glass of water because you want to appreciate the taste and frantically gulping water because you are dying of thirst in the middle of a desert. If you do not have foundational self-love, you go out into the world starving, and starving people do not make healthy decisions. They grasp, they consume. They use other people as life rafts to keep from drowning in their own self-loathing. But when you have done the agonizing inner work of self-love, you do not need the other person to validate your right to exist. Your life raft is already secure, and because you do not need to consume them for your own survival, you are finally free to actually love them. That is the shift, from needing to loving, from consuming to giving. And when you take this active, disciplined practice of love, this combination of presence, honesty, mutuality, and spiritual growth, and you decide to apply it not just inside your living room, but to the world outside your front door, love transforms into something far larger than a personal feeling. It becomes a revolution. This is the final evolution of Hooks' philosophy, the love ethic. Hooks is arguing that love is not just a warm sentiment meant for greeting cards and wedding vows. It is a vital political force, a governing principle for how a society should function. She challenges you to take the exact same definition we started with, the will to extend yourself to nurture spiritual growth, and apply it to the largest problems we face. Imagine filtering public policy through a love ethic. What would our approach to poverty look like, to systemic racism, to environmental destruction? What if our laws, our tax codes, and our social safety nets were guided by the foundational principle that every single human being has a right to live fully and well? To a lot of political scientists or economists, that sounds utopian. But Hooks argues it is deeply, urgently pragmatic. She is pointing out a glaring historical fact. You cannot build a sustainable, thriving world on the logic of domination. We have tried it. For centuries, we have organized society around power, greed, competition, and the domination of the weak by the strong. And the result is a world failing us on a catastrophic scale. Vast, sickening inequalities, the collapse of our biosphere, a pervasive, suffocating epidemic of loneliness and despair. But Hooks is clear that the love ethic is not just about voting or passing laws, it is about the micro-political choices you make every single day. Every time you choose genuine care over strategic self-interest in your workplace, every time you strike up a real conversation with your neighbor instead of rushing inside to stare at a screen, every time you choose community over isolated consumerism, in those moments you are actively practicing the love ethic. You are throwing sand in the gears of a system that profits from your alienation. Every act of love is an act of resistance. Now, there are cynics listening to this right now, and I can already hear the objection. This sounds beautiful, but it is impossibly idealistic. Love does not lower inflation. Love does not solve global supply chain crises. You cannot hug the economy into compliance. Hooks anticipates that cynicism, because cynicism is the default language of a loveless culture. Think about that for a second. The so-called realistic approach of ruthless, dog-eat-dog competition has not made us safer, happier, or more secure. It has led to widespread nihilism. The realistic adults in the room have driven the car to the edge of the cliff. So the love ethic is not a fluffy utopian fantasy. It is a rigorous, deeply practical re-evaluation of our core values. Love as a communal, disciplined, and political practice is literally the only rational alternative we have left. It is not weak to choose love. It is the most courageous, defiant act you can make. And now I want to bring this all the way back down to earth, back to the deeply personal. Toward the end of the book, Hooks shares a realization about her own life that brings everything into sharp focus. Despite being one of the most brilliant thinkers of her generation, she realized that she had spent much of her young adult life frantically searching the world for love. And through this work, she understood what she was actually doing. She was trying to go back to before the first wound, before the very first time she felt unloved, abandoned, or terrified. She was wandering through relationships, trying to recover a pristine past that no longer existed, seeking a perfect, unbroken state of grace that was gone forever. And recognizing that, she says, is the shift that sets you free. Love is not behind you. It is not a golden artifact you lost in your childhood or in your last failed relationship that you have to frantically search the earth to find again. It is not an object to be recovered. It is a house you have to build right now, today, with the flawed tools you have, in the messy, imperfect reality you currently inhabit. All About Love is not just a fascinating book to intellectually chew on. It is a discipline to be lived. So here is the thought I want to leave you with. Something to carry with you as you take off your headphones and walk back out into the world. Think about your own life. Identify one person you interact with almost every day out of sheer habit or numb obligation. It could be a colleague you pass in the hall, the barista who makes your coffee, a distant relative, or the neighbor you only ever give a polite nod to. What would actually happen if tomorrow morning you consciously, deliberately chose to interact with that person, not out of automatic habit, but as an act of will? What if you actively decided to nurture their spiritual growth, even in a micro interaction? What if you offered them genuine, undivided presence for 60 seconds? What if you spoke an honest word of care? What if you completely rejected the transactional script society handed you? How would that one tiny, deliberate shift begin to change the gravity of your world? If Hooks is right, and the evidence strongly suggests she is, those microscopic daily acts of will are exactly how the culture changes. The revolution does not start with a grand decree. It starts with one deliberate choice at a time. And maybe that is the answer to the paradox we started with. We stop waiting for the feeling to overwhelm us, and we start doing the messy, unglamorous daily work of extending ourselves. We stop being the most documented, isolated generation in human history, and we take the terrifying risk of becoming the most present one. If this hits something in you, share it. Not to feed the algorithm, but as a small, deliberate, revolutionary act of love.